My name's Topher Field, and me and my marbles are about to blow your mind, showing you things that the government does not want you to know about how Australia's preferential voting system works. First, we're going to do a mock election to talk about why we have a preferential voting system in the first place. Let's do it. Lots of people wonder, why can't we just have a nice simple electoral system like what they have in America for their presidential elections, where you just put it at number 1 next to the person you want to vote for and that's it? Why are we numbering all these other boxes? Well, there's really good reasons why that's the case. Let's take a hypothetical US presidential election, starting with only 2 candidates. Now here we have candidate A, candidate B, doesn't matter who they are. This candidate is more popular, currently leading by about 10%, with 55% of the overall vote and 45% of the overall vote for the less popular candidate. In this very simple scenario, this is going to be the winner clearly, and that simple system of just writing a 1 next to the person you want to vote for is going to work just fine. The problem is this isn't how it works in reality. How it works in reality is that there's more than 2 candidates. Let's introduce candidate C. And let's say hypothetically that candidate C was very charismatic and had lots of policies that are very similar to candidate A. There's a lot of overlap in the voters that they appeal to. And immediately, a whole bunch of people who would have voted for candidate A are now voting for candidate C. And the problem with this is that the overall ideology, philosophy that is represented by both A and C is more popular than the one that is represented by candidate B. But there's only one of candidate B, and because there's multiple representing this other ideology, well, unfortunately, what you have is a situation where these two have split each other's vote. And therefore, the candidate with the most votes by themselves is still candidate B, with only 45% of the overall vote. The Australian preferential voting system solves this problem by saying, hey, number every single box in the order that you would like them. So for example, you might have said, no, I'm going to vote number 1 for A, I'm going to vote number 2 for C because they're very similar, and if I can't have A, I'd rather have C. Or you might have gone the other way around. You might be one of the people that voted for C instead of voting for A because you like them even more. If C's not going to win, you want your vote to go to A instead of allowing B to win. When C gets eliminated because they have the fewest out of all of the votes, all of their votes go to the second preference that that voter voted for. In this case, we're going to assume that they're all going to A. And notwithstanding a whole bunch of escaped marbles, they get eliminated, but the vote carries on and carries A to victory. Because the truth is, this is the most popular candidate. The problem was that this option split that vote. Preferential voting solves this problem and actually means that you get a result that is much closer to the actual values and attitudes and will of the people. Let's have a look at an Australian lower house election. So here we have a mock lower house election. What I've done here is I've organised 8 hypothetical political parties, from the one that got the fewest votes all the way over here on my left to the one that got the most votes all the way over here on my right. There's a Labor Party, Liberal Party, the Greens. Then there's a whole bunch of these ones called FF number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. Now these are what I'm referring to as freedom-friendly parties. These are generally the minor parties that are actually standing up for us. Our right to have smaller government, less tax, less regulation and intrusion into our lives, to have more freedom and more choice to be able to live our lives and live our lives well. They're not, for example, supporting censorship on the internet. They're not, for example, supporting government-mandated digital IDs and these kinds of big government programs that the Liberal Party, the Labor Party, the Greens and the Nationals are all very much in lockstep and agreement with. So I'm going to refer to the Liberal, Labor, Greens, Nationals alliance as the establishment and the others as the freedom-friendly anti-establishment parties. In this election, the way that it's going to work is that the party that gets the fewest votes is going to be eliminated first. Now that makes sense. They're the least popular out of all of them. Now when I say the fewest votes, these are the fewest first preferences. So these are the ones where you write the number 1. Then you write the number 2 next to another party that you like second best, your second preference. Then you write a number 3 next to your third preference. That's why it's called a preferential voting system. So this party got the fewest first preferences out of everybody. Now it so happens this is one of the freedom-friendly minor parties. They really didn't do very well in this particular seat. It doesn't matter who it is particularly. What matters is whether or not their voters were educated and understood how the system works. You see, what happens a lot of the time with people who vote for these freedom-friendly parties is they'll vote number 1 for whichever their preferred party is, and then they'll just vote number 2 for the Liberals, or vote number 2 for the Nationals. And what that would mean in this situation is all of these votes from this party that's getting eliminated would just get tipped straight into the Liberals bucket. And that, unfortunately, is how a lot of people are currently voting. And that's a disaster because you're not making proper use of the preferential voting system. What you need to do instead is make sure that every single freedom-friendly party is numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, however many you have in your lower house seat before you number any of the major parties. Before you number anybody else, you number all of the freedom-friendly parties. Because what happens is these votes are being eliminated. This party has no chance of winning this seat. They're gone. But the votes live on in the form of their second preferences and then their third and then their fourth. In this case, let's say a few of them did vote for the Liberal Party at number 2, unfortunately. So a few of the votes are lost for our purposes in terms of trying to get freedom-friendly parties elected. But a lot of the voters for this party were educated. They watched this video, someone shared it with them, and they knew to vote number 1 for whoever they liked the most, and then number 2 for the next best. And they might not agree on who that is. But it doesn't matter which order they put the freedom-friendly parties in, as long as every single voter has put every single freedom-friendly party, it will sort itself out, as we'll see. Now then what happens with the first party having been eliminated is that the parties are now reordered according to how many votes they have now after that round of preferences. It so happens, because those preferences were pretty evenly distributed between these parties, that the order really hasn't changed at this moment in time, and so we simply go back to look at the next party that gets eliminated. In this particular case, it's an anti-freedom party, and you have to understand, we're not the only ones who know how this works. The anti-freedom, the establishment parties have a bunch of little parties that harvest preferences for them, and that's what this represents here. Now, we're going to assume that the people voting for an anti-freedom party are going to be mostly preferencing the Greens and Labor. That's going to be likely how this is going to work, and so, sure enough, that's exactly what they do. A whole bunch of their votes go to the Greens as their second preference. A whole bunch of their votes go to Labor as their second preference, but they themselves are eliminated. Now, once again, unfortunately, we haven't seen a change in order. Even with those preferences beginning to gather, it hasn't changed the order of who actually has the most votes and who currently has the least. But as we eliminate the small parties with only a few votes each, that will begin to change, as we'll see right now. The next party on the chopping block is another freedom-friendly party. That's unfortunate, but it's just how the system works. They didn't get enough votes even after 2 rounds of preferences, so they are now getting eliminated. But let's say that this freedom-friendly party did a really good job of communicating with their members and supporters and voters the importance of voting number 1 for them and number 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever for all of the others. And so the vast majority, it so happens in this case, the vast majority of people that voted for this freedom-friendly party first voted for this freedom-friendly party second. And that matters. Because those votes go in there, this party's eliminated. This party now has enough votes to get over the top of the Greens. Because remember, before we eliminate the next smallest party, we reorder them according to the distribution of preferences. So the next one to get eliminated is the next smallest. It's another one of the freedom-friendly parties who once again did a good job of making sure that all of their members had seen this video and understood how the preferential system worked. And so therefore, even though that party was unfortunately eliminated, those votes in their second preferences, a few of them, of course, will do the wrong thing and send them to the Liberal Party. But the vast majority have sent them to the other freedom-friendly parties. Now, by the way, you might be wondering what happens if the second preference is a freedom-friendly party that's already been eliminated. Well, it just gets skipped. So it doesn't actually matter. It doesn't hurt you. Just as long as you've put all of the freedom-friendly parties as your top numbers before you put anyone else, that's literally all that matters. So in this case, all of these votes go as their second, or in some cases it'll be their third preferences, maybe fourth preferences. They all end up gathering into a single freedom-friendly party. And this is the awesome bit. Because these have gathered, now this freedom-friendly party actually has more votes than the Liberals, and, for the time being, more votes than Labor. It's not enough to win. To win, you need 50% plus 1, but it's enough to be temporarily at the top of the tables right now because all of those freedom-friendly parties communicated that message to all of their voters and supporters to vote for every single freedom-friendly party at number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many you've got, before you put Liberal, Labor, Greens, or anybody else on your ticket. But here's where the magic really starts to kick in. Now we eliminate the Greens. They're the next on the chopping block. They, of course, will primarily have preferenced Labor. I'm just going to assume every single one of them has preferenced Labor. That puts Labor really close to winning. They're on about 47% at this point in time, which means they're actually now back in front of our freedom-friendly party. But don't despair, because this, being in the middle when there's 3 left, this is what matters. You can be first, that's great, but even if you're second, you're still in really good shape. If we can get freedom-friendly parties to be here, second out of the final 3, then we can watch some magical things happen. Thanks to the preferential voting system, we just continue as we have before. This time it's going to be the Liberal Party being eliminated because they couldn't compete with the gathering of preferences between all of the freedom-friendly parties that worked together and educated their voters. Now, the thing with a Liberal Party voter is very few of them are going to vote for Labor as their number 2. Very few people vote number 1 Liberal, number 2 Labor, or vice versa. Most people who vote Liberal are going to put Labor down the bottom, or very close to it. Maybe the Greens at the bottom, and then Labor next from the bottom, which means that every other party is going to be somewhere in between. They'll vote number 1 for the Liberals, number 2 for this one, number 3 for another freedom-friendly party, number 4. They don't really care. They're just putting everyone else in between, under the Liberal Party and above the Labor Party. And if they do that, then that is magic for us. Because what that means is that most of these preferences, by no means all, some will go to Labor, but the majority of these preferences will end up with this freedom-friendly party, no matter who it is. And so, most of these preferences end up in here. And hey presto, we have, let's say, 51%, 52% sitting in a freedom-friendly party, whose primary vote may have only been 15% to start with. But by working together and educating all of the freedom-friendly parties, educating all of their voters, sure, one freedom-friendly party might have 15%, another might have 12%, another might have 6%, but if all of those preferences start gathering into one place, we stand a very good chance of getting a freedom-friendly party MP elected in the lower house. Right, so that's the House of Representatives. The easier one is the Senate, and we'll cover that now. All right, the Senate is that big white piece of paper, that enormous unwieldy thing, because there's always a bajillion candidates and it's infuriating. And to make matters worse, not only is the piece of paper massive, but there's this big line horizontally along it. And there's a bunch of boxes above the line and there's a bunch of boxes below the line. Above the line, each box represents one party. But each party has actually put up multiple candidates, and that's because in the Senate, there's not one seat available, but actually a total of 12 seats, 12 Senate seats available per state, 6 of which are carried over from the last election. Every single election, we are electing 6 senators. So there are actually 6 seats available, which makes it easier to get one. So above the line, that big thick line that runs horizontally along the piece of paper, are the party boxes. And if you put numbers in those boxes, then you are essentially voting for all of their respective candidates, all 6 of the Liberals if you put them at number 1, or all 6 of the Labor candidates if you put them at number 1. However, you can also vote below the line. And below the line, every single individual candidate is now actually listed, every single one of them. So you have a choice. You can either vote for at least 6 parties above the line, or you can vote for at least 12 individuals below the line. So I would recommend that what you want to do is choose above or below the line. How detailed do you want to get? Let's say you go above the line. Just make sure that you vote for every single freedom-friendly party, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many there are, before you number anyone else. And then if you'd really rather see the Liberal Party get a Senate seat rather than the Labor Party, then you can put them at the end. You put them as either your number 7 or 8 or wherever that falls. Make sure you number at least the minimum required number, which is 6 for above the line. But you number all the freedom-friendly parties first, and then put on a backup at the very end if you really, really feel like you have to. Let's look at how this plays out in practice, because with the 6 seats available and these votes having already been distributed, and yes, I've got all these extra parties here along the way representing just the plethora of micro parties that there will be in every single state vying for Senate seats. What I've got here is the Liberal Party. They've got enough primary votes, that's the number 1 votes, to get at least 1 Senate seat. So the way it works is we allocate quotas as they form. I'll show you. The Liberal Party, just on primary votes alone, without the need for any preferences, already have one quota for one of the 6 available Senate seats. That's theirs now, and it can't be taken off them. They got it already. They've actually got a heap of votes left over, and I reckon that might be enough for a second quota. Let's find out. All right, not only did the Liberal Party have 2 quotas, but they've actually got just a few votes left over. And so what we do is we move them to the appropriate position according to how many votes they have left. And that's actually going to be all the way, I've made this hard for myself, it's going to be all the way down here. All right. Now we can also see that the Labor Party have quite a lot of votes as well. They've definitely got at least 1 quota. Let's do that now. Right, sure enough, 1 quota, but looks like they might have more. Oh, not quite. They don't quite have a quota yet. They're going to need some preferences from other parties to get them all the way to a quota. So this actually goes back in. They don't have a second Senate seat yet. So here we have the Labor Party with a Senate seat. The Liberal Party have 2 Senate seats, which they keep. Even though they've only got a few votes left, they've got a few votes left because they've already claimed 2 Senate seats. So they stay with the Liberal Party. The Greens might actually already have a Senate seat as well. Let's find out. Oh yeah, the Greens have done well in this particular state. They've got 1 Senate seat with some votes left over. Now those leftover votes all the way down here, just above the Liberal Party. So the Greens are still in it. They're still in the running for another Senate seat. So here's the lie of the land right now. We have the Liberal Party with 2 Senate seats and a handful of votes left. We have the Labor Party with 1 Senate seat and already most of the way to another quota for a second Senate seat. We have the Greens with 1 Senate seat and a handful of votes left. And no one else has a quota. There are still 2 up for grabs. How do we figure this out? Well, exactly the same way as we did in the lower house. We find the party that has the fewest remaining votes after these quotas have been distributed, which in this case is a random unnamed freedom-friendly party number 7. Doesn't matter who they are. They're a micro party. They scored a single solitary vote, and therefore that party is being eliminated, but the vote lives on thanks to preferential voting. So I'm going to say that this particular voter who voted for that particular party preferenced this particular freedom-friendly party up here. They get eliminated, doesn't really change anything. There's lots of this that goes on because there's lots of micro parties. So now we go to the next one. Well, the next one is freedom-friendly party number 6. Well, they got at least 3 votes, which is better, so they're getting eliminated. And each of these votes goes individually to the second preference of that particular voter. And this is important. There's a lot of people who think that the preferences go where the party sends them, and that used to be true. But that stopped being true a couple of elections ago. So now it's all in your hands. It's all about what you do. So let's say one of them gives it to the Liberal Party, one of them gives it to this freedom-friendly party, and one of them gives their second preference to that freedom-friendly party, which it so happens, because these 2 freedom-friendly parties were so close together, actually has the effect of flipping them around, and now this is the one in the lead out of those few. But again, these aren't making substantial differences to the outcome because we're only distributing small amounts of votes, but that changes as we go along. The next party to get eliminated is this random anti-freedom party here. Now, in this particular case, we can pretty safely assume that the people who are voting for these single-issue anti-freedom pro-establishment parties, not that they know it, are going to be preferencing the Greens overwhelmingly, and that's exactly what happens in this case. Those preferences all flow to the Greens, and that actually has the effect of elevating the Greens up above this freedom-friendly minor party that we have here. Actually, the next one to get eliminated is going to be this freedom-friendly party right here. Now, they're beginning to get a decent number of votes. Unfortunately, that party, well played them. They got some votes, but they're now being kicked out of the running. But they did a great job of educating their voters, and their voters knew what they were doing and made sure that their preferences got distributed around the place into different freedom-friendly parties. Now, it so happens that that little preference that just went into this freedom-friendly party causes them to swap back with the Greens, demoting the Greens down just that little bit lower again. Now, notwithstanding, they've already got 1 seat. The Liberal Party have 2 seats, the Labor Party have 1, and almost another quota. So, here's where it gets interesting, and people don't quite understand this. The Liberal Party, all the way down here, sitting on just a few votes, even though they've won 2 Senate seats already, now they just get treated like any other party. And guess what? They're the next ones to be eliminated. Now, the Liberal Party voters, They don't necessarily like the freedom-friendly parties. I mean, they voted for an establishment party to begin with, but they really don't like Labor and they really don't like the Greens, which means that most of these preferences are going to end up being distributed amongst various freedom-friendly parties. That's just how it's going to work. What that leads us to now is the Greens' preferences being distributed because they are now the next lowest. Now again, they already won one Senate seat, but they're getting knocked out of the running for another. Now most of their preferences are going to flow neatly to the Labor Party. Now you remember how the Labor Party nearly had a quota earlier? Well, they've probably got one now thanks to those preferences from the Greens. Let's have a look. Yep, pretty much exactly a quota with basically nothing left over. I'm just going to eliminate them and say, congratulations, Labor. You've got your 2 Senate seats. Well played you. And now we simply continue this process. Now what's really interesting here is obviously we're now being left mostly with the freedom-friendly minor parties, and this is actually what happens in reality. If you watch and go through exactly how Senate preferences have been distributed in past elections, you'll notice that quite a lot of these freedom-friendly parties make it towards the very end. And what we're all doing now, all the remaining parties are competing for one single solitary remaining Senate seat. And it's a matter of whoever can get closest. So this is now the freedom-friendly party being eliminated, and their preferences get distributed amongst the other freedom-friendly parties. Let's say, hypothetically, the majority end up going in here. Because for whatever reason, those two parties had a close relationship with each other, and lots of the people that voted number 1 for that freedom-friendly party that just got eliminated voted number 2 for these guys. Well, that means that these guys leapfrog those guys and move up a little bit. Now, here's where we get to something interesting. Here is a remaining anti-freedom party. Now, this party would have preferenced the Greens, would have preferenced Labor, or I should say the voters that voted for this party would have preferenced Greens, would have preferenced the Labor Party, but those have been eliminated. Now, there's a funny thing that can happen in the Senate that can't happen in the lower house. In the lower house, you have to number every single box, which means that your vote will continue all the way through down to the final 2 parties. But in the Senate, you only have to vote for 6 above the line or 12 below the line, which means that it's actually possible for your vote to expire. These have no preferences. These are orphaned votes, and these votes actually end up discontinuing. It's the only way that it can happen under the Australian system. So that party has been eliminated, and also their preferences have been eliminated as well. It is more complicated than that. I'm not going to go deep into the arcane math behind it. In principle, those votes are expiring. What we're left with is a handful of freedom-friendly parties that are now squabbling over the last Senate spot. This one gets eliminated. Most of its preferences go, but some of them will also expire because maybe they preference the Liberal Party and they didn't actually put any of these other freedom-friendly parties in. So some of these votes expire as well. Then this one here, same deal. For the most part, they're getting eliminated now, really. The last Senate seat is down to a single horse race. But once again, some of the votes do expire because maybe the message didn't quite get through as well as it needed to about preferencing all of the minor parties. But not to worry, because this last Senate seat doesn't have to be a full quota. It's whoever can get the closest. So even if there were other anti-freedom parties still in the running, it wouldn't really matter. It just comes down to who gets the closest. And our job is to make sure that people who align with us and want to vote for freedom and support freedom understand how the preferential system works so that we use it and all of the preferences gather into one party. I don't really care which. And it so happens with the way these marbles have worked out that that is a full quota, but it wouldn't even matter as long as they are the closest to having a full quota. And so that after preferences is how this particular hypothetical state Senate election, or federal Senate, but for representing one particular state, works. We've got 2 seats to the Liberal Party, 2 seats to the Labor Party, 1 seat to the Greens, and 1 seat to a senator that's actually going to hold the rest of them accountable. And that's the bit that matters. Now, this is actually extremely achievable, unlike in the lower house, where it's going to be pretty tough to make that result happen. In the upper house, this is actually very, very achievable. This is something that we could achieve in every single state in Australia in any election. As soon as we, the people, decide to vote for these minor parties, for these freedom-friendly parties, these anti-establishment parties in large enough numbers, and use the preferential voting system correctly. This could be the outcome at the very next federal election, that every single state has at least one freedom-friendly senator being elected. We've covered why we have a preferential voting system. We've covered how it works in the lower house. We've covered how it works in the Senate. I'm now going to go through some frequently asked questions and talk about how the votes actually get counted in the lower house, because I know there's a lot of you sitting there saying, I've been a scrutineer and that's not how they counted it. Well, you're right, it's not. Let me explain. All right, so we're back into lower house configuration here. Now remember, the lower house is where you must get 50% plus 1 in order to win the seat. So as soon as one party has 50% plus 1, or more than 50% of the votes, they've won the seat. Nothing else really matters. Beyond that point, the preferences don't really actually matter or make a difference. So if we arrange them all in order here, from the least votes to the most votes, if the party with the most votes already has more than 50% of the votes, well, we can figure out instantly that there's no point calculating the preferences. There's no need, because one of the parties already has more than 50%. Now that does happen, but it's relatively rare. What's much more common is that there are two parties that between them have, let's say, 70%, 75% of the vote. And what that means is if you know that the number of votes in the second highest party is more than the combined total of all of the votes in all of the other parties put together, then you know that even if all of these preferences gathered perfectly into the third placed party, it couldn't possibly overtake the second place party. It's mathematically impossible. If you've got, let's say, 40% of the votes in this party, 40% of the votes in this party, and there's only 20% of the votes left, then even if all of those votes gathered into the same party and got all the way to that 20%, it's still less than 40%. It still doesn't get the job done. So what they do in these situations, the Australian Electoral Commission, they will recognise that this is now a two-party preferred race. What that means is really it's only between these two parties. But there's a third layer deeper. We have now over a century of voting history in Australia, and we know that if someone votes number 1 for this anti-freedom party over here, they're not voting number 2 for the freedom-friendly parties. Their preferences are probably going to the Greens and then to Labor. And we know that the freedom-friendly parties, the preferences are probably going to each other and then to the Nationals or to the Liberal Party. So even if, say, hypothetically, there's 30% of the vote here, 30% of the vote here, which leaves 40% of the vote between all of the other parties, in theory, if all 40% gathered via preferences into a single party, then this party could overtake second or even overtake first and end up potentially being the one that wins the seat. That's hypothetically possible, but we know in practice that that 40% of the votes that is not yet in one of the big two is not all going to gather into the same party. Because of the voting history that the AEC has, they're in a very good position to be able to know when to count, just simply count two-party preferred. But rest assured that after election night, every single seat is counted thoroughly and every single preference is properly calculated and properly allocated, and we get full reports. You can look them up online from past elections. We get full reports showing us exactly where every single vote went. And if the AEC discovers that they switched to a two-party preferred count and they should not have, then they will correct the record and the seat will be awarded to whoever it was that actually won based on preferences. But here's the thing, to my knowledge, that's never happened. To my knowledge, the AEC, who are very good at what they do, I'm no fan of theirs. If you know my history, you know I'm not a fan of the AEC, but I will defend them on this point. They know the math. And when they say, hey, we're going to count this two-party preferred because there's no real mathematical possibility of anyone other than these two winning, they've been right every single time, to my knowledge. My name's Topher Field. I hope you've learnt something through this Marbles video. I'm best known for my work during the battleground Melbourne era, COVID lockdowns, etc. down in Melbourne, Australia. You can watch my documentary completely for free at battlegroundmelbourne.com. You can also get my book, Good People Break Bad Laws, and all of my merch, including this t-shirt, which I think is hilarious because it says, "Don't make me repeat myself," and it's a quote from history. I don't know if you can see that down the bottom here. You can get all of my merch from the website Good People Break Bad Laws, and you can follow me on all of my socials at Topher Field. Thank you so much for watching. The most important thing, if you've learned something new in this video, if you understand things better than how the education system in this country has ever educated you before, then I need you to share this. I need you to get the word out, because this only works if enough people know about it, and that is up to you.